Story number 1. I still remember that night like it's carved into the back of my eyelids. I was only 10. My brother, Mason, had just turned 12. We were the kind of kids who craved mystery, who believed that the world had secrets meant just for us. The kind who got a little too excited when we overheard the neighbor kids whispering about that house at the end of Willowir Street. They said no one had lived there for decades. Not since the last owner, a reclusive old man, vanished without a trace. People called it cursed. They said anyone who tried to fix it up either disappeared or went mad. But that only made it more irresistible to two bored brothers on a sticky August night. Our parents thought we were asleep. We waited an hour after lights out, then I snuck into Mason's room. He already had 2 old-school crank flashlights, the kind that whine and squeal every time you press the lever to keep them alive. We slipped out the window and into the thick night, our hearts pounding louder than the cicadas. We weren't chasing ghosts. Not yet. We were chasing the thrill. The night air was heavy, and every step on the sidewalk felt like we were crossing some forbidden threshold. Mason led the way, all swagger and confidence. I followed close behind, clutching the flashlight with sweaty fingers. It didn't take long to get there. The house was just 6 lots down, past the tree line where the streetlights began to thin. It stood alone like it didn't want company, an ancient 2-story Victorian-style husk, with shutters hanging by rusted hinges and warped wood siding that peeled like old skin. It looked like it was waiting for us. Mason whispered, "This is it." Even in the dark, it looked wrong. Tilted, like the earth didn't want to hold it up anymore. The windows were clouded with grime, the glass cracked like spider webs. One of them had a jagged hole punched through the middle. Moss clung to the steps and ivy strangled the sides. There was no path, no porch light, no sign of life, which made it all the more terrifying when we heard the wind chimes. They hung above the door, gently clinking in the still night air, even though there wasn't a breeze. Mason led us around the back, where the grass had grown wild and swallowed up a forgotten sandbox and a rusted swing set. The door was locked, but Mason had already found a loose plank in the grass. Without hesitation, he started smashing at one of the back windows. Each hit sent a jolt through me. The sound was way too loud. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting someone, or something, to be watching us from the woods. After a few minutes, he cleared enough glass to reach in and slide the window open. The flashlight's crank screamed like a dying bird as we climbed inside. Immediately, we were hit by an overwhelming heat. It was sweltering, thick, smothering, like the house had lungs and we'd just crawled down its throat. We stood in what looked like a back den, small, bare, walls stripped down to splintered boards. The air stank of mildew and something else, sweet, like rot. There were no signs of life, no graffiti, no trash, just dust and a few pieces of furniture that looked like they'd grown out of the floorboards. It was wrong. Like we were the first to enter in 100 years, or the first stupid enough to try. We crept up to the main floor. Each step moaned beneath us as though the house resented every footfall. Our flashlights clicked and chirped with every crank, casting brief bursts of dim light down the hallway. That's when we heard it. A soft creak directly above us. I stopped. Mason shrugged. Old house. Settling. But I didn't believe that. That sound didn't feel random. It was deliberate. Like a step. Slow. Careful. Watching us from above. I whispered, "Let's just go." Mason scoffed, "We just got here." The flashlights were growing dim. I stopped cranking mine altogether. My hands were shaking. I wanted to listen. Another creak. Same place. Just above. Mason started toward the staircase. I followed, heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake loose from my chest. Each step up felt like we were climbing into a mouth. At the top, there was only one door. Old. Pale. The paint flaked in long, dry strips. It was directly above where we'd heard the sounds. Mason approached slowly, still working the crank on his flashlight. It made that awful squeal again, echoing down the empty hall. I begged him not to open it. He ignored me. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his ear against the door. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Even the bugs outside had gone still. Then, bang! A single, thunderous slam from the other side. Mason screamed and fell back, clutching his head. He hit the wall hard and slid down it, eyes wide in pain and panic. His flashlight dropped and flickered violently on the floor, casting twisted shadows. I didn't wait. I grabbed his arm and pulled. He was still dazed, but instinct kicked in. We bolted down the stairs, through the hallway, and out the back window, not even stopping to check if we'd been followed. I've never run so fast in my life. Barefoot, breathing smoke, my chest on fire. When we reached our yard, we collapsed, panting in the dirt. Our parents caught us seconds later and demanded to know where we'd been. They didn't believe a word of it. They grounded us for a week. 2 nights later, something woke me up. I didn't know what at first. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart to calm down. Then I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. Wurchk. Wurchk. It was faint, mechanical, familiar. The crank of the flashlight. I sat up. My room was dark except for a thin line of light leaking through my blinds. The sound was coming from outside, directly below my window. I walked to the blinds with trembling hands and peeked out. As I did, the sound stopped. Nothing but blackness. No figures, no light, no movement. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I told myself I dreamed it. I've been telling myself that for years. But I know what I heard. We never went back to that house. Eventually, someone bought the property, tore it down, and built a sleek, modern duplex in its place, but no one ever stays there long. They move in with smiles and leave with sunken eyes. One family broke their lease in 2 months. The rumor around town is that the foundation's cursed, that the air there still burns like fire, and sometimes late at night if you walk past that corner you can still hear it. Wurchk, wurchk, like someone or something is trying to see again. Story number 2. We were 11 and 13 when it happened. Me and my cousin, Rory. It was the summer of 1998, in the sleepy town of Windale, Idaho, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and porch lights flickered long past midnight. That summer was unusually dry, and the moon always seemed too bright, like it was watching. Rory and I had spent most of our break doing nothing, but that night was different. We had heard about the Hollis house since we were little. Every kid in Windale had. Some said it used to be an orphanage before it burned down. Others claimed it was a funeral parlor that shut down after the owner was caught doing things with corpses. Either way, no one lived there now. The house stood 2 blocks away from Rory's place, peeking out from behind the trees like it was eavesdropping on the whole neighborhood. It was off limits according to every parent within a 10-mile radius, which of course made it irresistible. That night, after Rory's parents went to bed, we met in his room. The plan was simple. Wait until 1 a.m., then sneak out the window, cut through Mrs. Avery's backyard, and take Pine Hollow Lane straight to the Hollis property. Rory pulled out 2 hand-cranked flashlights he'd snagged from his dad's garage. They were old, military style, coated in army green with grips worn smooth from age. They clicked and whirred with every crank like the sound of bones grinding together. "They're noisy as hell," I whispered. "But we won't need them long," he grinned. Climbing out the window was easy. Rory's room sat just 3 feet above the grass and we landed soft, trying not to make a sound. The flashlight's gears chirped and snapped as we gave them life, casting uneven beams ahead of us. A light wind dragged dry leaves across the street like tiny whispers, and the faint hum of streetlights flickered in the distance. The temperature had dropped, enough to send goosebumps down my arms, though I didn't know if it was the cold or my nerves. We walked fast, but not fast enough. The closer we got to the Hollis house, the darker it felt. The air turned heavy, like walking through syrup. The neighborhood thinned out after the third block. No more houses, just a thick fence of sycamores, bending like hunched backs in the wind. The Hollis house stood beyond those trees. Its silhouette rose from the earth like it had grown there. Black wood siding curled away like peeling flesh. The roof sagged in the center, and jagged holes gaped open like eyes in the attic. Rory stopped. "Last chance," he said, smirking. I should have turned back. Everything in me screamed not to go further. But I was 13 and proud, and maybe even a little stupid. So I nodded. The front gate was warped and overgrown with weeds. We ducked through it and followed a gravel path barely visible beneath the vines. With every step, the house loomed taller, like it was leaning forward to meet us. We reached the back porch, where a broken swing creaked slowly, even though there was no wind. "It's locked," I whispered, testing the rusted door. "Good," I added too quickly, but Rory, ever the bold one, was already scanning the ground. He found a fallen branch, thick and heavy, and jabbed it through the kitchen window's weak spot. The glass shattered with a sound like a scream, and I almost bolted. He cleared out the shards with his sleeve, reached in, and popped the latch. I hesitated. "You go first," I muttered. Rory rolled his eyes and crawled in, flashlight beam sweeping across the dusty linoleum. I followed, heart thumping like a drumline. Inside, the air was suffocating, hot, stale, and thick with something bitter. It smelled like old rot and wet dirt. The room was empty, save for a table with one leg broken and a rusted sink filled with dead leaves. The wallpaper peeled off in strips, revealing long cracks underneath, like veins running through the walls. The flashlight cranked with every breath. Click, 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 whir. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet, and it made me uneasy. We crept past the kitchen and into what looked like a hallway. The floorboards moaned beneath us, but not from our steps alone. Every now and then, there was another sound. Softer, slower, deliberate. I paused. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "It's just the house settling," Rory replied. The same thing he always said whenever we were somewhere we shouldn't be. But I wasn't convinced. Every house settles. But this one sounded like it was breathing. We kept moving. The narrow hallway led to a den with a crumbling armchair and an overturned lamp. A set of stairs rose from the middle of the room, crooked and steep, as if they hadn't been climbed in decades. Something about the stairs felt wrong, like they weren't supposed to be there. The air around them was warmer, denser, as if the house had veins, and this was where the blood flowed. A thud echoed above us. Not a creak, not a groan. A clear, deliberate thud. I froze. Rory stopped cranking his flashlight, plunging us into almost darkness. My breath caught in my throat. "Don't move," I whispered. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then came another thud, this time louder, sharper, and directly above us. I grabbed Rory's arm. "Let's go, now." He pulled away. "Don't be a baby, let's check it out." What if it's not just house noise? He smirked, cranked his flashlight once, and started up the stairs. I had no choice but to follow. Every step groaned beneath our feet, and the air grew hotter as we climbed. At the top was a narrow hallway with 3 doors. 2 shut, 1 slightly ajar. The second door was directly above the den. "That's the one," Rory said. I didn't answer. My hands were shaking and my flashlight barely held its glow. He walked up to the door, placed his ear against it, and listened. Silence. Then, suddenly, a bang. A single, deafening bang from the other side of the door. Rory screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his ear. "Something hit the door," he gasped. "Something's in there." I dropped my flashlight. It clattered down the stairs as we bolted, practically falling over each other. Down the hallway, down the stairs, across the kitchen. We didn't stop until we were outside, panting and wide-eyed. We didn't speak until we climbed back through Rory's window and collapsed onto the carpet. But the nightmare wasn't over. 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a faint sound outside my window. I was back in my own house now, and my room faced the backyard. I sat up, squinting through the darkness. Click, 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 whir. My blood ran cold. That sound. The flashlight. I got up and peeked through the blinds. Nothing was there, just the empty backyard, moonlight stretching long shadows over the grass. Click, 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 whir. It was right outside my window now. I stepped back, heart hammering. Then, silence. Just like that. I waited, frozen, for what felt like an hour. But nothing else happened. I barely slept, and by morning, I told myself it had to be a dream, a nightmare playing tricks on me. But here's the thing. The next day, I found something on my porch. Rory's flashlight. Story number 3. There's something uniquely unsettling about danger disguised as kindness. I learned that the hard way during my final week of outreach work in Nara Heights, a lesser-known district on the outskirts of Osaka, Japan. It was early autumn of 2018. The nights had begun to take on that eerie, brittle chill, one that crawls into your jacket, your bones, and your instincts. My name is Madison, and I had been in Japan for over a year, working alongside a fellow outreach worker named Zoe. We were part of a small humanitarian program, offering food, literature, and compassion to people in need. We'd seen strange things in our time. Unexplainable things, sure, but nothing could have prepared us for what we were about to step into. It was a Tuesday night. The sky was bruised purple, laced with tendrils of thick clouds drifting low like ghosts waiting to drop. We were walking along one of the narrower streets of Nara Heights, lined with rusting fences, cracked sidewalks, and flickering neon signs that buzzed like gnats. That night, we decided to knock on a few more doors before heading in. Our supervisor always warned us not to wander too deep into this side of town. Said it wasn't safe after dark. The building we approached was different. The brick facade was stained with decades of rain and neglect. A faint, sour stench wafted from the alley next to it. Zoe gave me a hesitant look, her fingers hovering near the pepper spray keychain on her belt. I forced a smile and knocked on the metal door. It creaked open halfway before we even heard a latch. Standing there was a man, mid-40s, maybe older, dressed in a stained white tank top and worn cargo pants. His eyes were glassy, yellowed at the edges. A thick scar curled under his jaw, disappearing into his collarbone. He reeked of whiskey, sweat, and something else. Something rotten. You're the church girls, right? He slurred in Japanese, but with an oddly melodic tone. Come in, I got questions. I remember Zoe hesitating, but I gave a polite nod and stepped inside. We were trained to look past appearances. This was someone's home, and sometimes all someone needed was a bit of grace. We shouldn't have gone in. The air hung heavy with mold, incense, and stale alcohol. The lights were dim, barely functioning yellow bulbs that cast long shadows across the stained tatami floors. There was no furniture except for a low, oval table in the center of the room, surrounded by half-burnt candles and a dusty old television that hummed static. He motioned for us to sit, then locked the door behind him. My stomach dropped. I remember clenching my fists in my lap, trying to appear calm. The man sat down with a thud and grinned, revealing a row of yellow teeth. I used to believe, he said, suddenly serious. I was raised with it. Then I saw what belief really does to people. Turns them into prey. His eyes darted from me to Zoe. That's what you are, right? Prey dressed like saviors. We were trained to listen, not to provoke. The man stood up suddenly and stumbled over to the kitchen. He opened a cupboard and pulled out a bottle of soju, already half empty. As he chugged, he kept talking, rambling, unhinged. I used to do terrible things, he said, and I still do. I've made peace with the shadows. You two, you're just guests of the wrong kind? Zoe subtly nudged her foot toward mine under the table. It was a silent signal. Then he said something that made my blood turn cold. You ever hear of the Crimson Thread? He smiled like that was exactly the answer he wanted. It's what binds you to death," he whispered, slurring the syllables. "You can't see it, but it's there. I'm bound to death. And now, maybe, so are you." Then he crouched beside his futon, reached underneath, and dragged out a locked metal box. Zoe shot me a quick look. My sins, wrapped in paper. He fumbled with a tiny key around his neck, opened the box, and pulled out stacks, literal stacks of yen bundled with red bands. Millions of yen. Then, slowly, almost lovingly, he reached under the stacks and pulled out something long and narrow, wrapped in an oil-stained towel. He began unwrapping it. "We really should go," she said, her voice cracking. "We have other appointments tonight." The man looked up. "Not until I finish." I stood up too. "We can come back tomorrow. We'll bring books, food, anything you want." "No." His voice dropped several octaves. "Sit down, or I'll show you the thread up close." I saw what was inside the towel. It wasn't a gun. It was worse. A rusted katana, chipped at the edge. Dried, flaking rust along the blade. But something else too. Something darker. Something red. He held it up, let the candlelight flicker along the blade. "This sword took 30 lives," he said. "At least that's what I remember. I stopped counting. But tonight—" He tilted his head at us. I bolted. Zoe was right behind me. We didn't look back. I barely even heard him yell, though I swear I heard the blade clang against the floor. We yanked open the door with enough force to nearly rip the lock. Down the stairs, out into the dark. I tripped on the third step and scraped my elbow. Didn't stop. We ran through the maze of alleys until we reached the main road where the bus lights glowed like safety flares. Neither of us spoke until we were halfway across town, sitting in a tiny ramen shop, pretending to read the menu with shaking hands. We didn't tell the program director the full truth. Said we had a bad encounter and needed to skip that neighborhood for a few days. But the worst part? A week later, Zoe was packing her bags, heading back home to Nevada. On her last night, she found something tucked inside her bag. A strip of red silk, wrapped around a yen bill. No note, no explanation. We burned it. But that thread? I don't think it ever really left us. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear his voice whispering, "You can't see it, but it's there." Story number 4. There are certain sounds that don't belong in the dead of night. They seep through the cracks of silence, subtle at first, barely enough to stir you, but once you notice them, you can't unhear them. That's exactly what happened to 13-year-old Elliot Grayson on a cold February night in the quiet lakeside town of Brookvale, Oregon, in the year 2019. Elliot was home alone for the weekend. His dad, a trucker, was stuck in Idaho due to a freak snowstorm, and his stepmom had gone to take care of her ailing sister in Spokane. It was supposed to be peaceful. Some alone time, video games, leftover pizza, and soda. No curfews, no rules. But what started as a fun night quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. Something Elliot would never forget. It was just past 9:30 p.m. when Elliot first heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the window of the living room. He paused his game, pulling off his headset. Maybe a branch was brushing against the glass. But when he peeked through the curtain, the tree outside wasn't even close. The wind was still. The porch light flickered dimly, casting just enough glow to reveal nothing. No one was there. He chalked it up to his imagination and went back to gaming. But 10 minutes later, the tapping returned, this time at the kitchen window. Louder, sharper, more deliberate. Elliot froze, his fingers hovering above his controller. He didn't want to check again, but something compelled him to look. He crept into the kitchen and gently pushed the curtain aside. Again, nothing. Just the snow-covered yard and the distant woods beyond. Elliot's stomach churned. He locked the door and tried to distract himself with YouTube videos, but his mind wouldn't let go of those knocks. It wasn't just the sound. It was the precision. It wasn't random. It was like someone, or something, wanted in. Around 10:15 p.m., the house went deathly quiet. No taps, no wind, no creaks, just silence. Elliot finally felt himself relax and went upstairs to his bedroom. He texted his dad to check in but got no reply, probably no signal up in those Idaho mountains. He tried watching a movie, but halfway through he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the window right next to his bed. His blood ran cold. The knocks weren't frantic. They were slow, methodical, like someone trying to lure him closer. Elliot didn't move. He didn't want to look, but he had to. He slowly turned his head and peeked through the blinds. What he saw wasn't a face. It wasn't even a person. It was a silhouette, just barely visible in the darkness. A low, crouched figure, motionless, just beneath the window frame. At first, Elliot couldn't even register what he was looking at. It was too still, too shapeless, but the longer he stared, the clearer it became. This wasn't a prankster or a neighbor. Whatever it wasn't human. Its arms were too long, its posture unnatural, bent like a spider preparing to pounce. It stayed absolutely still, as if it knew he was watching, and then, without warning, it tilted its head, slowly, toward the window. Elliot stumbled backward in a panic, his heart racing out of control. He dropped to the floor and crawled under his bed, trembling, phone clutched to his chest. He dialed his dad, whispering into the phone, "There's someone outside. Something. It's watching me." His dad's voice was groggy but alarmed. "What? Are you sure it's not just your imagination? Hold on, I'll call the police right now. Lock your door, stay quiet." Elliot didn't respond. He was too busy listening. The knocking had stopped, but now he heard something else. Breathing. Faint, but real. Right outside the glass. Then, a voice. It was low, raspy, and almost childlike. A whisper that didn't sound like it belonged to any living thing. "Elliot!" He gasped and covered his mouth, tears welling up in his eyes. His limbs felt paralyzed. How did it know his name? There was no way. No way. He hadn't spoken out loud. He hadn't opened the window. No one knew he was alone tonight except his parents. And yet, it knew. The police arrived 9 minutes later. Elliot didn't even hear them at first. He was still under the bed, eyes wide, shaking uncontrollably. Only when the pounding on the front door started and a flashlight beam cut across the hallway did he dare move. When the officers searched the yard, there were no footprints. Not in the snow. Not even disturbed patches of it. Nothing but smooth, untouched frost beneath his window. The cops didn't believe him. One officer even smirked. "Probably some raccoon. You kids and your horror movies." But Elliot knew. He saw it. He heard it. And he felt something that night that words could never explain. The figure never came back. Or, if it did, it never made itself known. But every winter, when February rolls around and the snow begins to fall, Elliot hears it. Not the knock, not the whisper, but the breathing. It's always faint, just loud enough to remind him that it's still there, waiting, watching, patient. There are legends in Brookvale about the Hollow Watcher, a thing that lives between worlds, slipping through the cracks in the cold months when the veil is thin. It doesn't kill, it doesn't chase, it just watches. And when it finds someone alone, someone vulnerable, it knocks. No one knows what it wants. Some say it's looking for a vessel. Others say it feeds off fear. But Elliot, he believes it's choosing. And next time, it won't just knock. So if you ever hear a soft knock on your window in the middle of a snowy night, don't look. Don't listen. And for the love of all that's holy, don't whisper its name back, because if you do, the Hollow Watcher might just choose you next. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to @Dark Crescent, your new home for the darkest, eeriest, and most spine-tingling horror stories on YouTube. turn off the lights, grab your headphones, and we'll see you in the shadows.